We also have to think about noise. Recognize what noise is taking place during communication. And this may seem like a simple one to you because what's the first type? What do you think of first when you think of noise? Well, you think of physical noise, sure. Is that always present? Not necessarily, of course not. We could be in perfect silence, but physical noise basically means machinery running, air conditioner humming in the background, a dog barking next to us or next door, busy highway, um, someone, the radio on loud, someone trying to get our attention in another room. That's all physical noise. Now, that may or may not be taking place, but that's just one type of noise, and that's the first type of noise we generally think about. But there's other types of noise too, and these are important to recognize. Now, these are in no particular order, but the second type of noise we're going to address is and recognize is physiological noise. Physiological noise is simply has to do with impairments of the senses in either the sender or the receiver. It doesn't matter which. Say, for instance, if I'm the sender in a situation and I have a speech impediment and there are some words I can't pronounce, that would be physiological noise. If, for instance, you were receiving my message and you were hard of hearing, or I was talking to you and you could not see my expressions because of a physical impairment. You were blind without your glasses, basically you didn't have your glasses on. Those are physiological impairments of the senses. That's what we call physiological noise. It's always to do with impairments of senses in either the receiver or the sender. Now, another type of noise is psychological noise. Really important that you recognize this one. This has to do with biases or prejudices a person may have. It could also have to do with wandering thoughts. Just think that psychological noise has to do with the mind. It's hard for us to escape this one because we're human beings. We have a mind. Biases or prejudices. Have you ever talked to someone, you're trying to explain something to someone, and before you even get started, you're thinking, oh, I know they're going to have an idea of how this played out, or this person I'm telling them about, they don't like them to begin with, or they like them. That's another, it doesn't have to be negative. A bias can be a positive bias too. Um, and this can also include wandering thoughts, not concentrating on what the person's saying. Anything to do with the mind is psychological noise. The last one is semantic noise. This simply has to do with understanding or misunderstanding the meanings of words. The receiver may not understand the meaning of a word as the sender has the meaning that the sender has in mind. The words basically are understood differently between sender and receiver. Good example of this is a doctor's medical jargon. If your doctor rattles off some medical names of something that you have, you would not understand him. So semantic noise only has to do with meanings of words. So, which one of these do you think is the one that you really can't avoid? It's a noise that pretty much it's more often present than the other three. Which one do you think? Think about that. If you guessed psychological, I would say you're right. Something's always going on in our minds, or not. Okay, that's noise. Now let's look at some principles of communication. And there are a few I'm going to concentrate on. I may not cover every single one in the book. But understanding these principles of communication are really very important to understanding communication of people in all of its forms, communication between people in all of its forms. First one, real basic one, is that communication is purposeful. There's always a purpose in communication, even if it's only to play, to mess around, to just play. So these are the 5 purposes that communication may fill: to learn, to relate, to help, to influence, or to play. Think about this question. The first day of class, we did a exercise in which I paired you up and you introduced each other. Which one, or could be several of these, that was the purpose of that communication? What do you think? To learn? Probably. To learn about each other a bit. To relate? I would say so. Relate to each other as students. To help? Possibly. Help each other feel comfortable in the class. To influence? I wouldn't say so. I wasn't trying to influence. You weren't trying to influence us in any way. So, but how about to play? It was just something to have fun with. Another principle of communication that we want to realize is that communication is a package of signals. And all this means is that the message is not always only in the verbal. Earlier, I talked about someone giving a compliment and smiling, which also added to the verbal message of giving a compliment. If the person gives a compliment, doesn't smile, and doesn't even face you, you might read something else into that compliment. So it's always a package of signals. There's more going on than just the words. Our communication also involves both content and relationship dimensions. The content is the meaning that's external to both persons, whereas the relationship is how the persons relate to each other. Here's a really good example to demonstrate the fact that there are always content and relationship dimensions as well to any communication, or can be to any communication. So you're going into a meeting and your boss says, "Can I see you after the meeting?" What might that mean to you? Ooh, what does my boss want to see me about? Am I fired? What's going to happen? On the other hand, if a coworker says, "Can I see you after the meeting?" You might think, "Yeah, I wonder what they're up to. Wonder what that's about." So it can mean different things. The same words, the same message can mean different things depending on your relationship with the person sending the message. It's also interesting to think about the principle that communication is a process of adjustment. We seem to adjust our communication without even realizing it many times based on how the other person is communicating with us. We may communicate differently, we may use different words, and the communication accommodation theory states that we tend to accommodate our own communication and how we send messages based on how the other person is sending theirs. Here's an example. When I was a kid, my dad was a maintenance supervisor at a trucking company. And this was before cell phone, so he would get calls on the landline sometimes in the middle of the night from truck drivers who were out on the road and broke down. And my dad would have to send someone out to help him out with the repair or whatever. And I heard my dad one now. My dad was he was a high school graduate, didn't have any college, but he had very good grammar. And one night I heard him saying to this truck driver or whoever he was talking to, well, them don't do that. It was just really poor grammar. And I was really surprised. I remember thinking, my dad doesn't talk like that. Well, the explanation is that he was mimicking the way that the person at the other end of the line was speaking with him. And this is something that we do to relate to the other person. We relate to the other person this way. Interesting. We also have to recognize that communication involves power. There's lots of different kinds of power. But communication is guided by, in many cases, who has what type of power. And it's a factor. It's a factor in how we communicate.